Leviticus 25. It's time for one of the longer chapters in Leviticus, all about the celebration of Sabbath and the celebration of Jubilee and the celebration of slavery. Again. The Lord said to Moses at Mount Sinai, "Speak to the Israelites and say to them, when you enter the land I am going to give you, the land itself must observe a Sabbath to the Lord. For 6 years sow your fields, and for 6 years prune your vineyards and gather their crops. But in the 7th year the land is to have a year of Sabbath rest, a Sabbath to the Lord. Do not sow your fields or prune your vineyards. Do not reap what grows of itself or harvest the grapes of your unintended vines. The land is to have a year of rest. Whatever the land yields during the Sabbath year will be food for you, for yourself, your male and female servants, and the hired worker and temporary resident who live among you, as well as for your livestock and the wild animals in your land. Whatever the land produces may be eaten." The land has to observe the Sabbath. The inanimate ground has to rest for a year, and if it doesn't, it will be destroyed. So now we know what earthquakes are. Look, I am not a farmer, but it seems really dumb to let your land take an entire year off, where you're not picking the fruits or tending to the field. If you don't pick grapes off the vine, you're not gonna get good grapes in the future. It's not like the land will just start working again after a year off. Land needs constant attention. Give it some weekends off, not a full year. And this is assuming that those previous 6 years were going perfectly, which is almost certainly not gonna happen. You have to account for some bad weather patches over time. Count off 7 Sabbath years, 7 times 7 years, so that the 7 Sabbath years amount to a period of 49 years. Then have the trumpet sounded everywhere on the 10th day of the 7th month. On the Day of Atonement, sound the trumpet throughout your land. Consecrate the 50th year and proclaim liberty throughout the land to all its inhabitants. It shall be a jubilee for you. Each of you is to return to your family property and to your own clan. The 50th year shall be a jubilee for you. Do not sow and do not reap what grows of itself, or harvest the unintended vines, for it is a jubilee and is to be holy for you. Eat only what is taken directly from the fields. A family reunion every 50 years. I could live with that. Jubilee is like having your birthday in a leap year. Just when you think it's time, nope, just shut up and wait longer. Do you really need the trumpet sound to announce Jubilee? I feel like that year would be marked down in a calendar somewhere. No one is standing around hearing the trumpet and going, "Oh, that's this year? Who knew?" Also, God said we are not tending to the field in year 49 because it's a Sabbath year, and he's now saying we're not doing it again in year 50 because of the Jubilee. Which means that land is basically being ignored for 2 straight years. So everything I just said a couple minutes ago, it's like that, but worse. Here's a little bit of trivia for you. The line "proclaim liberty throughout the land to all its inhabitants" is inscribed on the Liberty Bell, and it was used by abolitionists trying to end slavery. Even though the Bible only refers to freeing people every 50 years, and not always and not constantly. In this year of Jubilee, everyone is to return to their own property. If you sell land to any of your own people or buy land from them, do not take advantage of each other. You are to buy from your own people on the basis of the number of years since the Jubilee. And they are to sell to you on the basis of the number of years left for harvesting crops. When the years are many, you are to increase the price. And when the years are few, you are to decrease the price, because what is really being sold to you is the number of crops. Do not take advantage of each other, but fear your God. I am the Lord your God. So when it's Jubilee, you're not supposed to take advantage of the people you're doing business with. The implication there, then, is that everyone's just screwing each other over the other 49 years. It is deeply ironic that this passage says, "Do not take advantage of each other." Because in a little bit, we're going to see examples of forced labor and slavery. Follow my decrees and be careful to obey my laws, and you will live safely in the land. Then the land will yield its fruit, and you will eat your fill and live there in safety. You may ask, what will we eat in the 7th year if we do not plant or harvest our crops? I will send you such a blessing in the 6th year that the land will yield enough for 3 years. While you plant during the 8th year, you will eat from the whole crop and will continue to eat from it until the harvest of the 9th year comes in. This is so weird. All the people were like, God, we can't not eat for an entire year. We're not you. And God says, it's fine. In year 6, I'll make sure the land gives you food for years 6, 7, and 8. Which means in year 8, you'll be eating food that's 2 years old. But you'll like it, or else. Which also means that that year is actually a continuation of the previous set of 7 years. Which also means that year 2 is actually the new year 1. So I think everything shifts by a year. And also there's going to be a test on this later, and if you fail, you'll all be tortured for eternity. If God can just produce 3 years worth of food in 1 year, why is he making them farm at all? Just give them the damn food. Capitalists are the worst. The land must not be sold permanently because the land is mine, and you reside in my land as foreigners and strangers. Throughout the land that you hold as a possession, you must provide for the redemption of the land. Of course, God's a landlord on this side. He created the universe, then began swiping property before everyone else could get it. If one of your fellow Israelites becomes poor and sells some of their property, their nearest relative is to come and redeem what they have sold. If, however, there is no one to redeem it for them, but later on they prosper and acquire sufficient means to redeem it themselves, they are to determine the value for the years since they sold it and refund the balance to the one to whom they sold it. They can then go back to their own property. But if they do not acquire the means to repay, what was sold will remain in the possession of the buyer until the year of Jubilee. It will be returned in the Jubilee, and they can then go back to their property. The Bible has turned into the fine print that comes with a mortgage. But look at that loophole. If you have to sell off your property, which is actually God's property, someone in your family must purchase it. If that's not possible, you gotta pay for it later. But guess what? If you can't, it's still yours. Happy Jubilee. Money means nothing here. Property doesn't matter. Ignore everything I said for this past chapter. Even in the Bible, the boomers get to keep everything and the millennials just get to borrow. Anyone who sells a house in a walled city retains the right of redemption a full year after its sale. During that time, the seller may redeem it. If it is not redeemed before a full year has passed, the house in the walled city shall belong permanently to the buyer and the buyer's descendants. It is not to be returned in the Jubilee. But houses in villages without walls around them are to be considered as belonging to the open country. They can be redeemed, and they are to be returned in the Jubilee. God realized the loophole was a problem, so now the buyer gets to keep the property if the seller doesn't want it back immediately, but that only applies to gated communities. Because in the Bible, we like the rich. The homes of the peasants, however, cannot be sold because they belong to everyone. You thought they could build generational wealth? Not a chance. Biblical redlining is wild. The Levites always have the right to redeem their houses in the Levitical towns, which they possess. So the property of the Levites is redeemable. That is, a house sold in any town they hold, and is to be returned in the Jubilee, because the houses in the towns of the Levites are their property among the Israelites. But the pasture land belonging to their towns must not be sold. It is their permanent possession. Squatters' rights for the Levites. But the land cannot be sold. Even if they need the cash, they're stuck with it forever. Which is a rule that you know was written only because there's gotta be something wrong with the land. If any of your fellow Israelites become poor and are unable to support themselves among you, Help them as you would a foreigner and stranger, so they can continue to live among you. Do not take interest or any profit from them, but fear your God, so that they may continue to live among you. You must not lend them money at interest or sell them food at a profit. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt to give you the land of Canaan and to be your God. Well, that sounds nice. Help out the poor people. I mean, God's not going to do it, but you totally should. Give them money and food at face value, because when someone's poor and struggling, the way to help them is to sell them stuff at cost and not just give it to them for free, which would be even nicer. If any of your fellow Israelites become poor and sell themselves to you, do not make them work as slaves. They are to be treated as hired workers or temporary residents among you. They are to work for you until the year of Jubilee. Then they and their children are to be released, and they will go back to their own clans and to the property of their ancestors. Because the Israelites are my servants, whom I brought out of Egypt, they must not be sold as slaves. Do not rule over them ruthlessly, but fear your God. If you're an Israelite, you better hope you only get poor in year 48. Because if it happens in year 1, you have several crappy decades ahead of you before you can be free again. But don't worry, you're not a slave. Slavery is wrong. You and your children just have to work for someone until you're allowed to go back home. See? It's not slavery at all. Indentured servitude, sure, but, not the bad thing. You know as well as I do that none of these hired workers are allowed to be unionized. They are making minimum wage at best, just so God can avoid having people call it slavery. Your male and female slaves are to come from the nations around you. From them, you may buy slaves. You may also buy some of the temporary residents living among you and members of their clans born in your country, and they will become your property. You can bequeath them to your children as inherited property and can make them slaves for life. But you must not rule over your fellow Israelites ruthlessly. God totally forgot he's supposed to be against slavery. Ah well, if they're your neighbors, you can enslave them. And if they're just visiting, slaves. And if they were family members of those visitors born in this country, slaves. And then you can just give those slaves to your kids like a warlord's inheritance. But, be nice. Look at that caveat. Don't rule over your fellow Israelites ruthlessly. Everyone else, fine, but not my people. If a foreigner residing among you becomes rich, and any of your fellow Israelites become poor and sell themselves to the foreigner or to a member of the foreigner's clan, they retain the right of redemption after they have sold themselves. One of their relatives may redeem them. An uncle or a cousin or any blood relative in their clan may redeem them. Or, if they prosper, they may redeem themselves. They and their buyer are to count the time from the year they sold themselves up to the year of Jubilee. The price for their release is to be based on the rate paid to a hire worker for that number of years. If many years remain, they must pay for their redemption a larger share of the price paid for them. If only a few years remain until the year of Jubilee, they are to compute that and pay for their redemption accordingly. They are to be treated as workers hired from year to year. You must see to it that those to whom they owe service do not rule over them ruthlessly. Even if someone is not redeemed in any of these ways, they and their children are to be released in the year of Jubilee. For the Israelites belong to me as servants. They are my servants whom I brought out of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. So the rich are always fine. And if you become rich, great. And if someone wants to buy you, the cost is prorated. And if no one buys them, then you have to set them free during Jubilee. But don't worry, you can gather slaves right after that, and they are yours for another 50 years. There is a hierarchy here, though. Israelites who get sold into slavery to someone else have a way out through someone buying him or Jubilee. But if a foreigner becomes a slave to an Israelite, it's forever. Israelites can pass slaves down to their kids. No Jubilee for those slaves. I have no idea what the takeaway is for this chapter. I learned a lot about how to buy and sell people, and which people count more than others, and how not to farm. So I guess the Bible is full of useful wisdom, but let's not pretend it's a good book.